Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Little Book of Race and Restorative Justice, Black Lives, Healing, and U.S. Social Transformation by Fania E. Davis, narrated by Allyson Johnson. Publisher's note: this audiobook refers to figures included in the print and e-book editions of the book. 1. The Journey to Racial Justice and Restorative Justice. Akoben. Akoben is a traditional wind instrument used to summon warriors to the battlefield. May we be alert, devoted, and prepared to serve a good cause. The field of restorative justice arose in the mid-1970s in the United States out of disaffection with the dysfunction of our prevailing justice system in an effort to transform the way we think about and do justice. This was a new but old justice dawning on the stage of human history. During its first 40 years, however, the restorative justice community largely failed to address race. Quite surprisingly, given that it is people of color who overwhelmingly bear the brunt of the horrific inequities of our nation's criminal justice system, past and present. Just as the restorative justice community has historically failed to adopt a racial or social justice stance, few racial justice activists embrace restorative justice. Calling for a convergence of the two, this little book of race and restorative justice urges racial justice advocates to invite more healing energies into their lives, and restorative justice advocates to bring more warrior energies into theirs. My intent in invoking healer and warrior archetypes warrants classification. I do not use warrior in its oppositional or militaristic sense, but in its spiritual valence, connoting the integration of power and compassion as embodied in the bodhisattva or warrior sage. The fierce African Maasai warriors, whose foremost concern is with the well-being of the children, also come to mind. In an example closer to home, I think of the indigenous youth activists at Standing Rock who led the historic resistance to the Dakota Access Pipeline installation in 2016, and who engaged in ceremony as a form of social action, proclaiming they were water and earth protectors, not simply protesters. Nor do I use the term healer to connote one who works to heal the human body. Rather, I use it more broadly to mean one who aspires to heal the social body or transform social harm. Our nation was born in the horrific traumas of genocide and slavery. Because we have neither fully acknowledged nor reckoned with these twin traumas, much less worked to heal them, they perpetually reenact themselves transgenerationally. We who dedicate our lives to social change have a chance to succeed only if we also devote ourselves to individual and collective healing. Restorative justice, and the indigenous ethos in which it is grounded, fully discussed in Chapter 2, are strongly relational in their orientation. Both deeply value entering into and maintaining right relationship, as well as sharing one's personal story. Indigenous protocol invites us to introduce ourselves through ancestors, lineage, and land. And so I open this book by introducing myself and recounting how I came to embrace both racial justice and restorative justice, following the way of the warrior and healer. Born during the segregation era in Birmingham, Alabama, post-genocidal land of the Creek, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Alabama people, I am a descendant of West African captives forcibly removed during the transatlantic slave trade to North America. My and my 3 siblings' mother, Sally B. Davis, and father, B. Frank Davis, migrated from Alabama's countryside to the industrial hub of Birmingham during the 1930s. Our mother, a woman of courage and vision, ran away from home to Birmingham when only 14 years old to follow her dream of enrolling in the only black high school in the state. At that tender age, she defied her foster parents, who insisted that after graduating from elementary school, she begin domestic work for white people, as was then the custom. Our mother went on to complete high school and become one of the first blacks in Alabama to earn a graduate degree in early childhood education. Our father, the first in his family to graduate from college, was also the first black to own an automotive business and parking lot in downtown Birmingham, located in what is now known as the Civil Rights District. Founded in 1871, Birmingham was the southern center of mining, railroading, and iron and steel production, designed to exploit the cheap, non-unionized labor of newly freed Africans, giving it a competitive edge over northern cities. By the 1960s, when my siblings and I were growing up, it was the most racially segregated city in the nation, dubbed Bombingham because of the frequent bombings intended to terrorize churches and individuals active in the civil rights movement. We lived on Dynamite Hill, a neighborhood regularly bombed because it was home to black families who dared move into the previously all-white neighborhood, formerly an antebellum slave plantation. We were fortunate our home was never struck, but the nightmarish explosions of bombs targeting our neighbors' homes jarred us awake during the early hours of the morning. Fathers in the neighborhood organized an armed patrol in self-defense, and at times our father, awakened by the noise of footsteps, would grab his gun and run outside to reconnoiter, fearful that terrorists lurked nearby. Everything was segregated: schools, churches, parks, libraries, movies, and neighborhoods. This segregation extended to relationships. Police detained my father and a white out-of-town visitor simply because they were riding in a car together. My older sister participated in an interracial discussion group at First Congregational Church, our home church, and for that reason was targeted for bombings. Racial terror was part of our daily life. I later came to understand these conditions were virtually indistinguishable from South African apartheid. As a child, I was surrounded by black people fighting for change. Arthur D. Shores, a legendary civil rights attorney, lived just across the street from our church. My sister and I were friends with his daughters. Attorney Shores litigated landmark cases before the U.S. Supreme Court, cases vindicating voting rights, ending segregation in housing, public schools, and the state university, stopping police terror and racial discrimination in unions, and securing equal pay for Birmingham's black schoolteachers. He also represented Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and thousands of others during Birmingham's civil rights protests of the 1960s. His work made him a target, and his home was bombed 3 times. He took to sitting on the porch at night armed with a shotgun. At a young age, I was transfixed by and felt a kinship with Lawyer Shores. While short in stature, he was a colossus and warrior for justice in my eyes. Our mother was also a longtime social justice activist. In the 1930s, she served as an officer in the Southern Negro Youth Congress, a progressive anti-racist organization, and helped lead the work of the unemployed councils. These councils formed during the 1930s to protest mass unemployment and inadequate relief, and worked to free the Scottsboro brothers, 9 young black men, ages 13 to 20, falsely accused of raping 2 white women. Her activism continued into the 1940s in the anti-fascist movement, the 1950s and 60s in the civil rights movement, and later in the 1970s in the international campaign to free her daughter, my sister, Angela Davis, who was a political prisoner at the time. During the early 1980s, my mother served as consultant to the Ministry of Education in socialist Grenada before the U.S. invasion. While we were growing up, our mother's voice was a powerful antidote to pervasive social messaging that declared black people subhuman, ever instilling a deep confidence that we should never feel ourselves inferior to whites. As a preteen, I developed a visceral response to injustice and engaged in my own spontaneous acts of resistance. For instance, deliberately sitting in the whites-only section in the front of the bus, drinking water from white fountains, and entering white restrooms. I always managed to escape arrest, even when police were called. Some acts of resistance were humorous. My sister and I were learning French, and while we were downtown one day, we pretended to be French-speaking foreigners. With heavy French accents, we inquired about shoes in an upscale store. Spellbound by the exotic, the store clerk seated us in the front of the store, not the back, as was protocol for black customers. They rolled out the red carpet. After a few minutes of trying on shoes and communicating with strained English and gestures, my sister and I burst out laughing. The sales clerks laughed along, politely, asking what was so funny. In our black Southern English, we responded, "All black people have to do is pretend to come from another country, and you treat us like dignitaries." We triumphantly sashayed out of the store. Our mother resolved to send all her children to well-resourced high schools in the North as an alternative to finishing high school in the separate, unequal, and under-resourced schools of the South. I subsequently left in 1962, at 15 years old, to attend a New Jersey high school under the auspices of the Quakers' Southern Negro Student Project. This project extended cultural and educational opportunities to black students from the Jim Crow South by placing them with white families in northern cities so they could attend non-segregated high schools during their junior and senior years. I lived with a Polish family who escaped fascism's concentration camps and fled to the United States in the 1940s. I was thrilled to be part of this brand new and exciting world. My host family exposed me to New York's museums and bohemian art scene. This was a whole new world. I was living and socializing with white people and exploring their culture for the first time. It did not take long, however, to discover that racial discrimination existed up north, too, though it was expressed more subtly. My classmates invited my host sister, who was my age, to social events, but snubbed me. Teachers made offensive comments about my hair, while students made fun of my southern drawl. The only black student in my class, I was socially isolated. I responded by devouring James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time and other racial justice texts of the times. I militantly spoke out in class on current racial justice issues. I attended demonstrations and protests, consumed with the desire to be a warrior for justice. After the first year up north, I returned home during the summer of 1963 to participate in nonviolence training and voter registration efforts with the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights, a prominent Birmingham civil rights organization that led all the sit-ins, boycotts, litigations, marches, and other militant protests that ultimately brought segregation to its knees. On August 28, 1963, I marched on Washington, D.C. with 250,000 others, calling for jobs, decent housing, civil rights, and an end to police brutality, demands that continue to resonate today more than 55 years later. I remember gazing upon the throngs of young and old, black and white, churchfolk and trade unionists, and teachers and students. I remember the music, along with the beauty and clarity of the light, but mostly I remember the strong spirit of unity, joy, peace, and victory wafting in the air. Less than 2 weeks later, after I had returned to New Jersey as a high school senior, my mother called with devastating news. 2 close friends had perished in the 1963 Birmingham Sunday school bombing at the 16th Street Baptist Church, an attack carried out by white supremacists to terrorize the rising civil rights movement. For days I was angry, then numb. Ultimately, the deaths of my friends and other formative experiences stoked inner fires of an enduring commitment to fundamental social change and a deep yearning for freedom for my people from the spirit-crushing systems of racial inequality and terror. Ever since, my life has been a quest for social transformation. For the next decades, I followed the way of the warrior as an activist in the black student, black nationalist, women's prisoners, anti-imperialist, anti-apartheid, anti-war, anti-racial violence, and socialist movements. I began undergraduate studies at Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania during the heady days of the Black Power movement. Critical of the perceived assimilationist stance of the civil rights movement, the youth-driven Black Power movement emphasized militance and the creation of parallel political and cultural institutions to advance black values and collective economic interests. We unapologetically affirmed blackness. I wore my hair naturally in an afro, took an African name, and for a time shared anti-white sentiment. I was active in the Swarthmore African American Students Association, SAS. In conjunction with the black student protests sweeping the nation in 1968, SAS occupied the Swarthmore admissions office for 8 days, demanding better representation of African Americans among students, staff, and faculty, and within the curriculum. The occupation was complicated by the tragic fatal heart attack of the sitting president of the college. But ultimately, the protest transformed the face of the college, which by the next year had more black students, faculty, and administrators. The college also established a black cultural center. In the heat of the struggle, I married a fellow student leader and activist from a nearby Black Students Association that worked in solidarity with our group. After graduating, we moved to California in 1969 to begin graduate studies at the University of California, San Diego, UCSD, where my sister was already enrolled. We encountered a campus deep in political turmoil. Throngs of striking students congregated on the campus plaza, demanding that a new school on the UCSD campus be named for Argentinian and Congolese revolutionaries Che Guevara and Patrice Lumumba, and that its curriculum equip black and brown students with the knowledge needed to win their people's liberation. UCSD students were also engaged in anti-Vietnam War protests, part of the larger student movement then sweeping the nation. We became involved in these efforts and began community-based work with the local Black Panther Party chapter. I also became active in the Soledad Brothers Defense Committee, SBDC, and in the Women's Liberation Movement. However, barely 6 months after our arrival, officers broke into our apartment with guns drawn. When my husband went for his gun in self-defense, police shot and nearly killed him. Subsequently, we were both indicted for attempted murder of the very police officers who attacked us. A defense committee sprang into action, raising funds to defray legal costs. Following a long legal battle, charges were finally dismissed when the court ruled we had been targeted for political activism in violation of the Constitution. During this time, my sister Angela was also in news headlines when Ronald Reagan, as the governor of California, fired her from her UCLA teaching position because of her Communist Party membership. The action was overruled as an unlawful violation of her First Amendment rights, and the court ordered reinstatement. The story was widely publicized, and overnight Angela became a controversial public figure. Faced with countless death threats, she had to surround herself with armed guards at all times, be it at school, protests, or home. But her security detail could not protect her from what happened next. On August 7, 1970, 17-year-old Jonathan Jackson, one of Angela's bodyguards, smuggled guns into a Marin County, California courtroom, took over the courtroom, and freed 3 inmates. In the process, he took a judge, district attorney, and 3 jurors hostage. Outside, they entered in a waiting van, but before Jonathan could drive off, sheriff's deputies fired a hail of bullets into the van, killing the judge, 2 prisoners, and Jonathan, and wounding others. Jonathan brandished guns registered in Angela's name, and though she was nowhere near the scene and no other evidence linked her to the incident, she was charged with capital murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. Fearing for her life, having witnessed so many murders of her Black Panther comrades, Angela went underground. The FBI put her on the 10 most wanted list and launched a manhunt unprecedented in scope, involving sweeps and detentions throughout the nation of thousands of light-skinned black women with natural hairstyles resembling Angela's. Authorities placed me under personal surveillance, and wherever I went, the shadow of men in suits and ties in unmarked dark cars lurked nearby. A week or so after the incident, a phalanx of SWAT, Special Weapons and Tactics police officers, invaded the San Francisco headquarters for the Soledad Brothers Defense Committee where I was visiting. Assault guns at the ready, they surrounded me, ready to take me down, until they realized I was not Angela. I was shaken to the core, but did my best to hide it as they interrogated me. I was most grateful that it was me at the end of the barrel of those guns, not my sister. The raid happened when my husband and I were en route to Canada to board a ship bound for Cuba for 2 months, with hundreds of other members of the 3rd Venceremos Brigade, to plant fruit trees in solidarity with the Cuban Revolution. Once there, we met revolutionaries from around the world, but despite fervent hopes, I did not find my sister there. Days before returning home, however, we received news that the FBI had captured Angela and taken her into custody unharmed. In my early 20s at the time, I only wanted one thing: to save my sister's life. My first act when returning from Cuba was to head to New York to visit her in jail. There was a warrant out for my husband's arrest, too, related to politically motivated charges of possession of explosives. He surrendered himself to authorities after getting off the boat. My husband would be released in 18 months, but Angela's life itself was at risk. Governor Reagan, President Nixon, and FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover were intent on silencing her through a legal lynching. Remaining by her side in New York, I began public speaking and giving media interviews. Within a few months, Angela was extradited to Northern California. I followed. There, I worked closely with seasoned and skilled African-American community organizers in the Communist Party to build the National United Committee to Free Angela Davis. The party activated its extensive international network of skilled community and labor organizers to organize many demonstrations and defense committees. I traveled nationally to speak at mass meetings and demonstrations calling for Angela's freedom. Angela Davis defense committees sprang up all over the nation. In people's homes, her photo adorned living room walls, alongside those of Dr. King and President Kennedy. Celebrated artists wrote songs and poems and produced plays and films for Angela. European school children in communist Germany launched massive letter-writing campaigns. Every day, postal carriers would haul bags filled with thousands of letters into Angela's cell. This was the power of the people writ large. I had already considered myself a socialist, but was so impressed by the passion, theory, practice, and organizing skills of the black communists who led the campaign to free my sister that I joined the Communist Party. Shortly after giving birth to my daughter, Angela Issa, in 1971, I embarked on a speaking tour of dozens of cities in Western and Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union, and Chile, building the international mass movement to save Angela's life. On June 4, 1972, following 18 months of incarceration, 4 months of a hard-fought trial, and 13 hours of deliberation, an all-white jury returned a verdict of not guilty on charges of murder, kidnapping, and criminal conspiracy, fully acquitting my sister. Heart-rending screams and shouts tore through the courtroom as the clerk of the court read the verdict and the judge struggled to regain control. The impact of the powerful and massive international movement demanding freedom for Angela was not lost on us that day. After 3 more years of organizing around political prisoners and economic justice in the Bay Area, I entered law school, convinced a law degree would make me a more effective agent of social transformation. While in law school, I helped lead a campaign to defend affirmative action and another to challenge the decision to deny tenure to a radical black professor. As I started to practice law, I also became active in anti-apartheid solidarity movements and efforts to stem the rise of the Ku Klux Klan and other racial terrorist groups at home. For more than 25 years, I was a trial lawyer, specializing in employment discrimination litigation, with a subspecialty in academic employment discrimination, mostly challenging discriminatory tenure denials by colleges and universities. After nearly 3 decades of cultivating the hyper-aggressive, hyper-rational, and hyper-masculinist personal qualities needed to be an effective activist and civil rights litigator, I fell out of balance. I was diagnosed with a precancerous condition. Transformation beckoned. Dreams, intuition, and my body were inviting me to summon more creative, healing, and spiritual energies into my life. I answered the call and shut down my law office to pursue a PhD in Indigenous Studies, a program in which I traveled to Africa to recover my indigenous origins and live with and learn from African traditional healers. Shortly after returning from Africa and completing the PhD, I learned about restorative justice, a justice that seeks not to punish but to heal, a justice, according to K. Pranis, that is not about getting even, but about getting well. A justice that seeks to transform broken lives, relationships, and communities rather than shatter them further. A justice that seeks reconciliation rather than a deepening of conflict. A healing justice rather than a harming justice. Learning about this new but ancient justice marked a climax in my own years-long movement toward wholeness. It provoked an epiphany, integrating my inner warrior with my inner healer and uniting the opposites within. Fire, water, solar, lunar, and masculine, feminine. Restorative justice allowed me to integrate these hitherto disparate parts. I did not have to choose one and renounce the other. At last, I could be all of me. A primary purpose of this book is to invite restorative justice practitioners to cultivate a heightened racial justice consciousness, and racial justice activists to embrace a greater healing consciousness. Through the coupling of what I refer to as warrior and healer, we develop the capacity to fulfill the promise of both the racial justice and restorative justice movements. Disrupt the school-to-prison pipeline, interrupt the new Jim Crow of mass incarceration, transform the historical harm that drives present-day state-sanctioned police violence against people of color, and ultimately, in my view, take the next step on the evolutionary journey of reimagining what it means to be human. Chapter 2 reviews the fundamentals of restorative justice, exposes its indigenous roots, and illustrates African-centered justice approaches. Through a critical race theory lens, Chapter 3 examines the nature of race and racism in the United States, the dearth of racial justice consciousness during the first 40 years of the restorative justice movement, and the dynamic transformations currently underway. Chapter 4 addresses the school-to-prison pipeline and race-based restorative justice practices in schools, with examples from Oakland, California, and Denver, Colorado schools. Chapter 5 addresses the origins of the U.S. punishment system in slavery, its afterlife in the form of racialized mass incarceration, and how prison activists and restorative justice practitioners are responding to it. Chapter 6 envisions a homegrown restorative justice-based truth and reconciliation process to transform police violence against African Americans. Chapter 7 reviews the unprecedented truth-telling efforts bubbling up across the nation today, outlines the evolution of my notion of justice over my life's journey, and concludes with an exhortation to activists and restorative justice practitioners to live and work at the intersection of healing and activism. The start of each chapter is adorned with an Adinkra image, visual symbols encoding proverbs and aphorisms of the Akan people, a large ethnic group of present-day Ghana and the Ivory Coast, West Africa. The focus on anti-black racism in this little book is not meant to deny or minimize the existence of anti-Latinx, anti-Native American, anti-Asian American, and other racisms. Indeed, other racialized histories have informed the development of both the criminal justice and restorative justice in the United States. This book, however, is meant to explore the Black experience, not in a narrow nationalistic exercise, but in a way that teases out implications for how we might collectively forge a transformed and just future for all. 2. Ubuntu, the indigenous ethos of restorative justice. Sankofa. The bird looks backward to bring forth the seed of a new future. Let us go back to the past to fetch that which is useful for the future. Umuntu numuntu nabantu. This Nguni proverb, translated as "I am because we are, and we are because I am," expresses the universal African core belief that the individual exists only in relationship to the collective. This communitarian view is known as Ubuntu in Southern Africa's Zulu, Xhosa, Tswana, Venda, and other African traditions. Also translated to mean a person is a person through their relationships, Ubuntu emphasizes humans' interidentity and interrelationality with all dimensions of existence, other people, places, land.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?